Hello folks, Jerry here and welcome to the story of Racing Rivals. This is a project which took me 2 years to complete, and while there were originally 4 parts, I've decided to combine them into one full video, a complete documentary on my favorite game of all time. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Ever since I was a kid, I've always loved racing games. Countless hours that I spent on games like Test Drive Unlimited, Trackmania, Juiced, the Need for Speed series. It shaped the passion that I have for cars up to this day. But of all the games that I've played, one is in a league of its own. And these days it's gone, but he'll never really be forgotten. You read the title, so let's go. Racing Rivals officially launched in August 2013 for iOS devices. However, a year later it was also released for the Facebook and Android platform, all of which were cross-compatible. From what I've been able to find, the game quickly found its target audience, and new players were coming to the game every single day. But I wasn't there in the beginning. In fact, the very first time I heard of Racing Rivals was in a different game, Car Town, which held a promotion event, because it was made by the same developers, and in that promotion event you could win 2 of the most iconic cars, from Racing Rivals, and Car Town was different, it wasn't really a drag racing game, so to speak. It was more about, collecting cars, building up your garage. You could also race your friends, but, it being a Facebook game, the gameplay was super basic, but it was still really fun, and it was, in fact, the first game that I actively recorded, so it kind of started up my YouTube channel. Sadly, in 2014, both Car Town X, which was a Japanese version of the game, and a couple of months later, also regular Car Town, were both shut down, and I was really skeptical to check out the Racing Rivals because, I was still pretty upset about what happened to Car Town. So after a couple of months of, me taking a break from YouTube because I really didn't have anything to record, I decided I should probably start doing something with my YouTube channel again. So I had this idea that I would, record myself playing a couple of different games, pretty much seeing what's gonna stick, and, maybe I would make something out of it. So, I have decided that the very first game that I'm gonna play after coming back from my break would be the game that killed Car Town, Racing Rivals. The day was the 20th of September 2014, and it was only a couple of weeks after the official launch for Facebook. I didn't know that at the time, it was just real lucky timing, but I started playing this game and it really intrigued me. It managed to grab my attention in a way that no other game really has before or since. And looking at the game, it seemed incredibly basic, but there was something extremely complex about it. The garage layout was simple, and so were the controls. On the beginning of each race, you'd have to rev your engine and launch at specific RPM to get a decent launch, but you were really aiming for the perfect launch, which only had a tiny window. After that, you instantly needed to press the nitrous button to make your car even faster for the duration of the race, and then you obviously needed to shift gears as well. Not only that, but every single car had a specific type of launch and shifts, and the shifts the game considered perfect were often not the fastest, so some of the cars were pretty straightforward to drive, but others were incredibly tough. I quickly noticed that my videos were getting an unexpected amount of views. I was actually one of the first people to make videos in the game, and even though, especially at the beginning, I was really bad at the game, it was still amazing to interact with the community through my videos and eventually also live streams. And then I realized something. You see, there was a feature in Racing Rivals, a feature which up to this day most racing games lack: the ability to pink slip your car, to bet it all on one race, winner takes both cars. And it was a massive game changer, and it was insanely popular. But people also realized that while pink slips were great for high stakes racing, if you lost the race on purpose, they also allowed you to transfer cars from one profile to another. And so, the trading community was born. On Facebook, Instagram, and all sorts of other places, people had specific groups where you could trade your cars with other people, And while some were sadly full of scammers, you also had some amazing trading groups where you could not only trade cars but also buy them for real money. And it didn't even stop there. There was an insane amount of cars in Racing Rivals. On release, it wasn't really all that impressive, but considering that cars were being added weekly in terms of showroom releases, turf wars, and then also the shipyard, over time it really added up. I mean, there were hundreds of unique car models in Racing Rivals, and every car had an assigned car class, a unique performance rating, and the ability to upgrade it. And the final stage 3 parts are often quite tricky to figure out, as you had 3 different parts available. Now, originally there were 6 car classes, ranging from D class to the R class, which had, the quickest cars, but with the 3.0 update in late 2014 they changed that. There were now 9 car classes because the R class split into 3 different categories: the R class, the R2 and the R3, which had the quickest cars. But along with that they also added the X class, which was a class reserved only for concept cars, oddly enough. Now, the best part of all of that is that pretty much every car class had its own fair share of amazing cars that were highly competitive against each other. I mean, you only had to master one car to be competitive against other people, and if you looked, you had people racing everything, not just the high-end stuff. I mentioned Turf Wars earlier. This was a weekly event where you and your crewmates would compete against other teams to win races on specific types of cars, to earn exclusive prizes like cash, gems, but what you were really aiming for were the turf cars. Every week you had a different prize car available for the teams that would push the hardest. Some would not only win the car, but the highest teams would also get an exclusive car wrap, and top of the top teams would also get exclusive rims to go with that. And while turfing was often expensive, you didn't really need to fully upgrade your car to be competitive. There were a lot of different lobbies for different performance ratings of the cars, meaning that all you needed was a good lobby tune and some driving skills to dominate. I remember turf cars being the most desirable and valuable cars when I started playing, and it took me quite a while before I would finally be able to trade a car of mine for a proper turf car. I still remember my first turf car like it was yesterday. It was a Nissan Skyline R32 and it wasn't really all that fast. It was only C-Class and it was one of the cheapest turf cars you could get. It didn't really matter because I finally got my hands on a proper exclusive turf car, and it was really important to me at the time, and I kept that car until the very final day. But it was only the beginning of my journey, and I'm not even talking about the campaign. I mean, yeah, sure, the campaign was of course there, where you could naturally progress through all the car classes and get, a couple of free cars along the way, but there wasn't really a huge emphasis on it, because in fact, your story in Racing Rivals could be anything you wanted it to be. Did you want to become the fastest driver in the game, pink slipping cars like the Pagani Zonda R and the McLaren F1 GTR? You could do that. Was that too nerve-wracking? You wanted to pink slip some cheaper cars, like, I don't know, a D-Class Civic against a Scion? You could always find an opponent. Did you want to build a Datsun 510, and put every single set of rims on the game on that specific car? People did that. Did you want to, I don't know, make a rainbow out of all the Evos that you have won in pinks? I did. My goal was to build up my garage to be competitive in any class, any event. I wanted to, master pink slips, to not be stressed out whenever I would pink slip, but holy shit did I have a long way to go. Now, when it came to pink slipping, you had in reality you had 2 ways to go. I mean, you could always YOLO your car against a quicker opponent, but most of the time that you just end up in disappointment. So the way I have decided to pink slip was to pretty much just automatically assume that every single person you're racing against is maxed, so I would be prepared, for that case, and I would just figure out the quicker times for every single car and just make sure that, me and the opponent would be even when pink slipping. But in case you didn't want to fully upgrade your car, because obviously, that cost money, you could also make a good lobby tune, because there were a lot of different, rated lobbies out there, and you could just make a killer tune, learn how to drive the car, and, try your luck with that. certain cars were actually a whole lot better being lobby tuned rather than fully upgraded. I mean, that was the case with X-Class cars, you know, a concept class which, when they were maxed, like pretty much all of them were useless. However, in lobby tunes, they were some of the quickest cars in the game, and usually on the black market, the car would be a lot better if it didn't have nitrous equipped yet, because that would make it a lot better for lobby tunings. Also, when upgrading your car, you always had the choice to either put a turbo or a supercharger on it, and while a supercharger was, you know, quicker and cheaper to fully upgrade, the turbo, you know, would ultimately end up being quicker on a car, so that was what you really wanted, even though there were some pretty rare exceptions. I started at the bottom of the pink slip ladder, I mean the D class, the pleb class. It was actually the natural place to start because, you know, maxing out your car really didn't take that much money, and you could always find an opponent in a Focus that I never realized was like the quickest D-class car for a couple of years, and, you know, I would always end up losing my Civics to them, but, you know, it happens. Now, at the beginning of the game, you had to choose between 3 different starter cars: a Scion TC, which was later on replaced by a Volkswagen Jetta, a Dodge Dart, and a Honda Civic Si. Now, out of the 3, the Dart was actually the quickest, but the one that turned out to be the most popular was the Civic Si. Still though, at the top of the D-Class food chain were 2 cars in particular, a Honda Civic Type R and the Ford Focus Titanium, and even though it turned out that Focus was actually quite a bit faster, I still decided to pink slip the Civic Type R first because I had one at hand. Still though, how was I supposed to, you know, run this thing consistently? The answer was the drop launch. It was actually fairly simple. At the beginning of the race, you'd have to rev your engine to the limiter and then release it at a very specific time to make sure that the revs would be right where they needed to be to get the perfect launch. All you needed was, you know, plenty of practice and to know the drop launch timing for the car you were driving, as every single car had a specific launch. For example, the Evo 8 release was right as the second light came on. You still had a car here or there that wouldn't work with this, as the revs would actually drop too slow for you to get the perfect launch, but most of the cars did have a drop launch. As I said earlier though, on most cars the game telling you that you got a perfect shift would not be the fastest way to go. Some cars you would actually have to shift right before the rev limiter, and some of them you would have to shift way earlier than you would expect. Thankfully, there was a person out there that made their lives a whole lot easier.
Hello everybody, Pigpen the one and only here. Thanks for joining me today. I have a Honda Civic Type R perfect launch tutorial for you. This is one of the fastest D-Class cars, but it can be very difficult to race.
His name was Pigpen the one and only. This dude was a legend. He dedicated his channel to helping noobs like me figure out how to get the best possible times of pretty much any popular car on the game. He would not only show us how to get the launch and shift the car, but also show us the proper max tune for it, and your setup would often be crucial to improve your chances to win. So, I started my pink slip journey with a Civic Type R. I was actually really hyped to start building my collection, but I finally maxed the Civic out. You know, I went to the racetrack and then I had an oh shit moment because I did not realize how nervous I was gonna be, you know, pink slipping even some of the cheaper cars. There was sort of an adrenaline thing going on. I really wasn't all that good, like, you know, my shifts were not on point, I wasn't getting the perfect launch most of the time, and I decided to pink slip the Civic anyway. And I won, and then I proceeded to, you know, lose the following 2 pink slips. I was left without a car and I had to go back to the drawing board. For a while, my controls even were pretty much, you know, I would launch on the keyboard and I would shift on the mouse. And it was not optimal whatsoever, and I did at least partially blame my setup for that, but I was determined that I was gonna become good at this. I got lucky. They actually fixed the controls and I didn't have to actually grab my mouse anymore in the middle of the race in order to, you know, shift, so that was a lot better. And because my channel actually got, you know, quite some followers because of Racing Rawls, I started getting some donations which actually allowed me to build up my collection, even though I was still pretty bad at the game. But when I eventually got my hands on another Civic, I could actually see the progress. The reaction times were getting lower, the shifts were getting more consistent, and I was getting alright. In late 2014, you could actually get a million of Racing Rivals cash on the black market for between 15 and 20 bucks. Most people weren't pink slipping higher tier cars as they got really expensive to upgrade in the higher classes, so more experienced racers actually resorted to taking cars of noobs in the lower ranks. I wanted to move into C-Class, but the thing was, C-Class wasn't ever as popular as D-Class was, and people who raced C-Class cars primarily only ran two cars, those being the Subi Coupe and the Nissan 300ZX, and after trying both of them, they really just weren't my cup of tea. Of course, I did have my turf car, the Nissan Skyline R32, but that was far too valuable for me to pink slip, so I just decided to skip C-Class altogether. And then the 18th of November 2014 happened. The 3.0 update. This was by far the biggest update to ever hit Racing Rivals at the time, and they added so much amazing stuff. The shipyard, the Racer Showdown, improved garage and upgrade menus. This was the start of the Racing Rivals golden era, and it was amazing. Of course, there were some hiccups. For example, the friends list was messed up on the launch, but they quickly fixed that and it was time to have some serious fun. B-Class. As most other car classes, you had three choices for your campaign car: the Evo 8, the Impreza WRX STI, and Neon SNRT4. But there was only one choice really: the Evo 8. Not only was it the quickest of the three, it was also by far the easiest to race. And it was also the quickest car in its entire class. It was pretty much the go-to car when it came to mid-tier pink slipping, and it was insanely competitive. You could hop into the game at any time of the day and you would find an opponent in an Evo in no time. So that's what I did. At this time I have mastered the drop launch, and the Evo had a release timing that was pretty easy to remember. You had to release as soon as the second light came on and then shift right at the red line without hitting the wall. The shifts were quick but not unmanageable. This car was going to be the stepping ground to something amazing. Go 8.663. Pretty decent, let's have a few more. But at the end of the day, I was still only decent with one car, which just wasn't enough for turfing. There were 4 turf days in a week, and each day had its own different criteria, so I just didn't have the variety yet. And then came the 23rd of December 2014. My first chance to actually prove myself. I mean, not at Turf Wars, that was still too expensive, but the solo version of Turf Wars, the Racer Showdown, was looking pretty good. Now, Racer Showdown was great. It was pretty much a one-day event where you would, compete against other players, as you would expect, and you would get a certain amount of points for winning against other people, depending on the car the opponent was driving. Now, the top 750 racers would actually get a bronze version of that week's prize car, the top 300 would get a silver car, a top 100 finish would get you a gold car, but the main prize of Racer Showdown, which had huge bragging rights, was actually a gold car with gold rims, and while sure, the prize car was only a wrapped version of a regular showroom car, the event was much shorter and the cost to actually get the prize car would be far lower than turfing. It wasn't so much about the price for me, it was pretty much about proving to myself that I was getting better at the game. Anyways, I still remember that event. The prize car was a C-Class Honda S2000 and the event restriction was superchargers only, meaning you could use any car as long as it had a supercharger on it. Now, all my Evos had turbos on them because, that was better, but I decided to give it a shot anyway, so I put superchargers on a couple of my Evos and I went racing. Now, my car wasn't the quickest in its lobby, but it was still pretty decent, and importantly, I had a couple of them, so I could just pretty much, just rotate them out and just continue racing, and before I knew it, I was in the top 750, and the top 300 was within reach. So I decided to push. As I got into the top 300, I realized that the event was still hours away from finishing, and me just leaving the game as it was, it would probably get me kicked out of the silver tier. So I decided to push, and before I knew it, I was knocking on the door of the top 100. At this point, I spent so many hours racing, all my cars were repairing, but I was like, screw it. I gotta do this. So I continued racing, and even as I went to bed, I still continued to check my rank every couple of minutes, just to make sure I wouldn't fall out of the top 100. I finished 79th in that event, way higher than I could have ever dreamt of. And I was so proud at that point. You know, I accomplished something that I never thought was going to be possible. And while my gold Honda S2000 was a completely useless car, I always liked looking at it because, you know, I did it. But still, I had used only Evos for that Racer Showdown, meaning I didn't actually learn how to drive any other cars. And while I was still, you know, uploading Evo Pink Slip videos daily, at that point I felt like it was a bit repetitive and I really wanted to, you know, change it up a bit. At that point I was pretty familiar with, you know, what the more popular cars in the game were, you know, such as the Civics, the Evos, the McLarens and the Vipers for S-Class, but I kept seeing a couple of cars in lobbies that I really didn't know if they were any good, and they piqued my interest. And that brings me to Racing Rivals Collective Records, a Facebook group where racers would share their records with specific cars in specific lobbies. The community created a super detailed list of the best times with certain cars in specific lobbies, and it was super interesting to see how my times compared to the best out there. For example, at the time, the best time with an Evo 8 was a 8.618, and while I had so many close runs, the best time I ever ended up achieving was a 8.619. There were plenty of other cars which weren't quite as optimized though, and I decided to start doing runs with two in particular. One of them was a Nissan Silvia S15, a B-Class stealth car which I actually built up from stock on my channel, and I actually managed to get the world record after a couple of days. Now, you probably feel that I should be super excited about getting a world record in a car, and well, I mean, there was a catch. At the time, the Silvia S15 was a super recent turf car, really hasn't been around for long, and well, people didn't really run them because they weren't all that useful maxed. So while I did feel good, and the record did actually stand for a surprising amount of time, it wasn't really all that impressive. Still though, the other car which I was running, the 2005 Subaru Impreza, was a little bit different. It was still a B-Class car, it was still pretty useless, even more useless than the Silvia S15. I believe it was actually the slowest B-Class car in the game, but it has been around for longer, so the records were more established, and it was a lot more difficult to actually get close to the records, even though this car, it brought something out in me. When I got the Silvia world record, I actually got an idea that perhaps I should start doing a series of videos, you know, trying to hunt down the world records, and so I did one for the Subaru. When I started recording, the world record was 9.064, and in the first run I have recorded, I destroyed the world record by 2 milliseconds. Oh my god, that was... I got the world record for the Subi. Holy shit. I mean, I cannot believe how well I raced in that video, you know, out of hundreds of Racing Rivals videos that I have made, that video with the Subaru was just something else, you know, good run after a good run, low reaction time after low reaction time. It was just... I believe that was racing-wise the best video I have ever made, and that was a record I was super proud of. And so I have finally proved to myself that I was capable of running cars which were not the Evo 8, and I have decided to finally move onto A-Class. You had three choices for your campaign car: a Challenger SRT8, an Acura NSX, and a Challenger RT. All of them were useless for A-Class, especially the Challenger RT, and they were nowhere on the level of the top A-Class cars like the Skyline R34, the Camaro Z28, the Supra. All of those three cars were amazing to drive, and I loved all three of them, but they weren't quite as massively available as the campaign cars because obviously, you know, those were by far the most common and therefore cheaper. And while not even the Supra, which was available to purchase with RRC, was that expensive, at the time it was simply just a bit too expensive for me, so I have just decided, hey, let's try S-Class. Even though this was after the 3.0 update, which meant that the S-Class wasn't the second highest car class in the game anymore, it was still a pretty considerable step up from, where I came from. And throughout all the years, I don't think any single car class changed as much as the S-Class did, because, they kept adding quicker and quicker cars, and it was pretty much unrecognizable by the end. Not in early 2015 though. I mean, I like the Civics, I love the Evos, but S-Class from that era has a special place in my heart because it was surprisingly unique. I mean, unlike other car classes, you only had two choices for your campaign car: the Dodge SRT Viper and the McLaren 12C, and the thing was, it wasn't really all that obvious which car was the better out of the two, and it all depended on your preference. Now, the world record for the McLaren was a couple of milliseconds quicker than the one of the Viper, but you did need to spend quite a bit of gems to fully upgrade your parts on the McLaren, so the Viper, it was a great comparator overall, and the driving styles were quite different as well. With the McLaren you shifted early, and with the Viper you shifted right at the wall. And while I did personally end up preferring the McLaren, both of them were truly amazing cars, and I think this is one of the most underrated rivalries in the whole game. Now, what made S-Class S-Class was the fact that it was so well balanced. I mean, at the bottom you had your useless cars, your old Ford GTs, the Dodge Viper ACRX, the McLaren F1, which was completely useless in this game. Then you had your campaign cars, the McLaren and the Viper, but you also had the Corvette ZR1, which was quite a bit more expensive, but it was also just a bit quicker, and it was super consistent, so it made it a great car to, try and take campaign cars from other people. But at the top of S-Class, you had four iconic turf cars: the Subi Sport, the Kobo Camaro, the Cobra Jet, and my personal favorite of the bunch, the Honda NSX RR, but it would take quite some time before I would, be able to pink slip that. After pink slipping a lot of S-Class cars and having a lot of fun, I was even thinking about moving on to R-Class. I mean, the campaign cars all seemed really cool. I mean, you had the Dodge Viper GTSR, which was already pretty nice, but it was definitely overshadowed by the two other choices. The Scion FRS Spec, which in its Los Angeles turf wrap was one of the most iconic cars in the game. I mean, it is in this thumbnail. And then you also had the Mazda RX-7 GT Spec, which was just amazing. It looked super cool, and it was just a nice poster car for the game. But they were still pretty expensive, considering that, in early 2015, the millions were pretty expensive, so I just decided, for now, I'm gonna stick with S-Class. And then, a huge shock. At the end of March 2015, they announced that the Facebook version of Racing Rivals would be shutting down on April 10th, and oh boy, this was horrible news for me, because I played, exclusively on Facebook. I did have a phone and a tablet, but they really weren't good enough to run the game in the first place, so, obviously I wouldn't be able to record the game, continue to upload my videos, but yeah, it was truly bad, and I really didn't know what I would do, so I just decided, hey, you know what, I'm gonna make a couple of final videos, I'm gonna, sell off my cars, obviously not all of them, so the cars like the Skyline and the S2K would stay in my garage forever, but yeah, I really thought that this was the end. I remember putting up that sale post, and it was so bittersweet because it was only a game, but it was a game that, I found my identity in, and, I put my time and effort and passion into this game and, the videos, and it was coming to an end so unexpectedly. So I, screenshot the pictures, I edited them, put them on Facebook, and I was thinking, maybe I'm gonna sell like one car or two cars, just something to, get a couple of my dollars back, but yeah, it was really unexpected. The most expensive car that I was selling at that point was a top 25 Honda HSV, which was a car that I really loved, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna put the price of this a bit higher because, I don't know, I just don't mind keeping it, but it sold within minutes, and I was shocked, I mean, I had a really good reputation because I did do quite a few deals and I never scammed anyone, and I was actually one of the, public sellers that anyone could literally just message and buy cards from. So, I mean, yeah, I did get my money back rather quickly, but I don't know. Was that really going to be it? Some of us have this one game that we think really fondly of. A game that in a way shaped us to be the people that we are today, and for me and many others, this is that game. This is the second of 4 parts of the story of Racing Glamorous, and I would really suggest that you watch part 1 first in case you haven't seen it yet. Other than that, let's jump into it. Now, we left off in a pretty precarious position for me because on April 10th of 2015, the Racing Glamorous Facebook version was shut down, and as someone who played exclusively on Facebook, this was some really bad news. I mean, apparently they shut it down because of the cheaters, but I did hear rumors at the time that most of the cheaters were actually in the Android version, so up to this day, I'm still not sure why they did it, but I was left without a game to play. I mean, I did have Racing Glamorous on my phone, but it was pretty laggy and I really couldn't race effectively on that. I did, however, pretty quickly realize that I was still able to actually trade cars and also buy and sell them, so I started buying cars that people wanted to buy and then selling them for a profit on my Facebook page. Now, I always made sure that the cars were in top shape, had proper tunes on them, had no engine damage and stuff like that, because I really wanted people to have a good buying experience with me, especially because there were so many scammers out there, and I did actually manage to do that quite well. So I went from selling 2 to 3 cars per day to doing like over 10 deals in each day. Now, at that point, my garage started to grow exponentially because, I was taking profits back into my garage and I amassed a really impressive collection of cars quite quickly. But I still couldn't race, because I could play on my phone, but I was used to the Facebook layout and it just wasn't the same for the time being. After around 1 month of hiatus, I came back to YouTube because I really missed being a part of the community, so I found this mobile emulator. I think it was BlueStacks or maybe it was like Nox or something like that, not totally sure, but the reaction times on the emulator still weren't ideal, but I could record again, not really racing videos, but I could definitely, show off certain cars, show off tunes, and I could also, focus more on the trading aspect of the game, so that's what I did. Now, at one point I even got brave and attempted pink slipping, and it went about as well as you would expect. Now, of course, me being kind of out of touch was also a part of the problem, but the inputs on the emulator, while being pretty good, were not nearly as accurate as on the phone. So yeah, for a decent chunk of Racing Glamorous' golden age, I couldn't even race properly. I mean, the summer of 2015 was really amazing though. That was the time when my channel peaked, all those years ago. But I got a hold on so many special cards that even a couple of months before that, I could never have dreamt of having all of them. I mean, Pagani's on the Rs, Golden Racer Showdown cards, Fox Body Mustang Race Editions, first place turf cards. I had it all, but I couldn't experience it properly, which looking back, I'm just like, why didn't I just get an iPad? In June 2015 we got the 4.0 update. Now, it didn't really change anything drastically, but we did get the tournaments feature. Now, this was a game mode where you would compete with 7 other people in 3 rounds and get either cash prizes or even your opponent's cars in the pink slip mode. Now, this feature was pretty short-lived because of cloning, as some people actually found a way to duplicate cars by glitching out the game, and the developers ditched the feature in record time, but plenty of rare cars would still lose their value drastically and would never recover cover. I mean, it was actually one of the reasons why later on in the game, turf pinks actually became a lot more affordable. Right after the 4.0 update dropped, we got one really bizarre partnership. Now, in July 2015, Racing Rivals joined up with WWE, which I'm still not sure why they did. WWE is this like American wrestling thing. I'm really not totally sure what it is, but in July 2015 we got a lot of WWE themed cars, all American of course, but more importantly, these cars were actually lighter than the normal versions, so they became rather sought after. For example, the Camaro Z28 was always the king of A-Class, but the WWE version would be 30 pounds lighter and therefore quicker. Now, some were of course absolutely useless, like the A-Class C6 Corvettes, but the fastest WWE cars, the R2 Class 1s, like the 2015 Mustang Race Edition, the C6Rs and the 4 GTRs would remain common in the lobbies until the very end. Like I said, 2015 was really an amazing era for racing rivals, and it resulted in an explosion of new YouTube content. I mean, of course Pigpen was still uploading his super useful launch tutorials, but we also got an influx of many new YouTubers, you know, such as iPolitely, DJMaslak, AlohaMongoose, Cali Sweetheart, and many more, and all of those really helped build up the community. Not all of them, unfortunately, though. I mean, we had some people like TSSN Spartan Soldier and Legit Jelly who took advantage of their fans and, you know, stole their in-game cars and also real money, but thankfully the community didn't take too kindly to them and they were both quite quickly forgotten. During that time, I actually ended up switching from my Jerry Rager account to a profile I bought called RGS Daily Sales. So, you know, the Jerry Rager account would pretty much be used for storage and, you know, I would record on the RGS Daily Sales one. When October 2015 came around, we got another update. The BMW month. I mean, they didn't call it that, but still. Along with the premiere of the BMW M2, which everyone got for free, the game also offered everyone BMW crates where we could get some rather interesting BMWs. I mean, some of them would end up being completely forgotten, like the 2002 Homage or the 1M MotoGP cars, but there were also a couple of game changers. I mean, cars like the M4 Racing and the CSL Homage ended up being one of the quickest cars in their own respective lobbies. Now, during the October of 2015 and for like half a year after that, I was dealing with some rather interesting personal issues, which I will not go into here. I mean, if you know, you know, but more importantly, I also realized that the game is not completely unplayable on my phone. I just really sucked at the beginning on the phone. I mean, it still wasn't ideal, but it was nowhere near as bad as I made it out to be. And so, in December of 2015, I finally got myself into a proper turf team. I mean, I only ended up turfing for like 3 weeks, but still. Now, the team name was Boosting PR, and this was a completely new experience for me. I mean, you had to, you know, pay close attention to the events, prepare your cars at least a day or two in advance, and then just grind races, you know, maybe winning a few pink slips, spending gems for, you know, repairs and boosts in the process. It was quite expensive, so my team was aiming for a top 25 every week, which pretty much means, you know, getting a wrapped version of that week's turf car, and we got it 3 times in a row, although once it was just barely, but we did manage to pull 3 in the end. So the cars that I earned were a Mustang Rivals Edition, a Subaru WRX Glue Edition, and a Citroen DS3 WRC. And I actually own a DS3 now, obviously not the rally version, but hey, it's a pretty cool car, and it's interesting that of all the cars, you know, that were in Racing Rivals, because as you guys can see, the car variety was getting insane at this point, but it's interesting that, you know, from all the turf cars, I actually own a standard version of a car I earned. Now, at that point, I've been playing Racing Rivals for over a year, and I was really happy with my progress. I mean, you know, I got somewhat decent at racing, but I was especially proud of my trades and sales. And another weird thing started happening as well. I mean, I was always a loner in real life, but during that time, that started changing. You see, because on my YouTube channel and active selling, I was communicating with a lot of people each day. Like, I woke up to like 30 messages on my Facebook, so it was a lot, but I ended up, being a whole lot more communicative and outgoing in real life as well, which was a thing I never was before, and I built friendships that I have up to this day. And so Racing Rivals and this whole community really made me who I am. But as I was evolving, so was the game. So I already mentioned that the card list was getting really impressive at this point, and it is true. I mean, card classes started looking a whole lot different than they did previously. For example, S-Class, they added cards like the Nismo GTR, the AMG SL65, and most importantly, the Lamborghini Murcielago, and all of those sort of cheaper alternative to the turf cars that previously ruled S-Class. But it wasn't only the cars that were changing the game. For example, in late 2015, the community discovered a really bizarre feature called ghost shifting. So if you played Racing Rivals during that time, you will probably remember ghost shifting as being one of the most polarizing things to ever happen in the game, and the developers really didn't do anything about it. But ghost shifting was, how do I explain it? With certain cars you could pretty much shift really quickly and skip a gear altogether and save up to 100 milliseconds at the finish line. Unfortunately for me, I never really learned ghost shifting because I just didn't feel like I was that advanced in the game. But even more unfortunately for me, some of the cars which I really liked racing the most were now affected by ghost shifting, most notably the Evo 8. And even though the Rainbow stayed in my garage until the end, I was never competitive with the Evo 8 again. So I was never really one of the greatest racers, but I did want to improve my YouTube content, make it unique. So I really, instead of racing, I mostly focused on car reviews, trading videos, and I even did a couple of collaborations with people like Pigpen, iPolitely, and Cali Sweetheart. And people seem to really enjoy that, so I just decided, hey, let's make more of that. I also decided that for the sake of the content, I will finally get myself an iPad to record on, but unfortunately for me, during that time, my PayPal account, even though I had the money, it was locked. The trading videos were fun though. I mean, with so many new cars being released, there was always a car that was, new and cool and everyone wanted it, and old cars started to lose value. But the most notable drop was actually in the value of Racing Rivals cash. So when I started playing, a million was about $15. But during early 2016, that price started dropping notably, so now it was only like $2 to $3. I wouldn't say that that was a bad thing though, because with Racing Rivals cash being a lot more attainable, it meant that new people could, start pink slipping and not necessarily lose a whole lot of money doing so. And so, showdown pinks became cheaper than ever, and it was so easy to find an opponent. And so, I decided to focus my channel on the new and shiny stuff, So, whenever a new card would arrive into the game, I would buy it, upgrade it, see how it drives, and then I would make a video and give my opinion on whether it's worth it or not. And I think that really helped out a lot of people, because some cars that were released, for example the Murcielago, were real game changers, and some of them just were not. Every now and then I would also, make a review of an iconic car, for example the first place Scion FRS spec. And at one point I even got loaned a first place Racer Showdown Toyota Supra, which I believe is the rarest car I ever had on my profile. I even decided to expand my Evo collection and collect an Evo with every single set of rims in the game. During that time we also got a new king of Racing Rivals. So previously the quickest car for well over a year was the Pagani Zonda R, but in February of 2016 we got the Koenigsegg 121. It was actually the first car that hit the speed rating of 1684 and was the only car that was able to hit 6.4s. Do you remember when I mentioned that the Evo 8 was the quickest B-class car? That all changed in April of 2016 with the arrival of the Lotus Exige, and it was weird, The Evo 8 was always a beast in B-class, hit 8.6s all day long, and it wasn't rivaled by anything. And then there was this Lotus, running 8.5s all day. The Exige was one of the weirdest cars in the game. I mean, first off, That was the launch. I mean, this car actually had two ways of launching. One was, you know, with stock tires, and one of them was with the upgraded tires. And it didn't even have a drop launch, which was super unique. But then you also had the upgrade pad, which with pretty much any car in Racing Rivals, you would be better off with a turbo or a supercharger. But the Exige was, I think, the only car that was actually slower with those parts. So keep in mind that a turbo or a supercharger were not reversible upgrades, so if you put any of them on the car, it would just be slower, and you know, that's the way I upgraded a couple of mine. So the Exige quickly became one of the most used cars in the game, but I'm happy to say that Evo 8 was able to, you know, overcome that and still be one of the most popular cars, even if it wasn't the king of B-Class anymore. On 20th of April 2016, we got the 5.0 update, so it's worth, you know, looking back because this is now one of the most fondly remembered versions of the game, and yet at the time it wasn't even all that notable. I mean, we got a couple of new cool things, you know. We got some new features for the already forgotten tournaments, we got new flake paint, we got colored headlights, we also had a new option to, you know, set your betting preferences in the multiplayer lobby, which was a nice touch, but that was really about it. And then it happened. My PayPal got unlocked. So I remember, you know, that day like it was yesterday. So, you know, I just got to school, the class was about to start in like 15 minutes, and I checked my phone and I saw that my PayPal was unlocked, and I was like, holy shit, this is my time. And so by the time the class started, I already ordered a new iPad and a Nexus 6P, and yeah, I could play Racing Rivals on the go, finally, effectively, and it was my time to shine. I actually got the devices on the same day, and I decided to check out Racing Rivals first on my new phone, and I did. It was really smooth and it was fun, but then I opened up Racing Rivals on the iPad, and it was like a whole new world opened up to me. So first off, the screen was bigger, so you could be, you know, way more accurate with your inputs, but the game was also so much smoother. I mean, the game was fun to play before, but this was a whole new level. Like, I spent hours racing cars that I previously raced on my old phone just to see if I could beat the times, and I could. This was the game in the way that the developers intended us to play, and it was so amazing and so much fun, and it was my time to race. I could finally try out certain cars that, you know, really loved by the community, cars like the S-Class Corvette ZR1 and the A-Class Camaro Z28, but with me now having the device to play properly, I also didn't have an excuse anymore to not race quicker cars. And so I began venturing into what eventually became my favorite car class in the entire game. The R2 class. I mean, cars here were really quick, but not quite the fastest in the game, and there was a lot of them. And for the summer of 2016, I spent, you know, so many hours racing cars like the Ford GTRs, the Corvette C7Rs, the Nismo GE3s, even complete pieces of shit like the BMW Z4 GE3, but, you know, I still had a chance to experience, you know, this pink slip mania, you know, where you would just hop on and find a pink slip instantly, and these were truly the best days of Racing Rivals. But before I get too carried away with that, there was a thing that happened in July of 2016, and it was, by that time, this was by far the most controversial thing that ever happened in Racing Rivals, and you might remember it if you played the game at the time. And I'm talking about the Ferrari Racer Club. Now, if you remember the Ferrari Racer Club, you probably also remember being pretty pissed off about it, and we'll get into that. But if you don't know what the Ferrari Racer Club was, it was pretty much a feature in Racing Rivals where in return for spending gems you would unlock a series of rewards, including some very special Ferrari cars. Some cars like the Ferrari California and the 360 Challenge Stradale were quite reasonable. For both of them you would have to spend about $10 in gems. Now keep in mind that you wouldn't actually spend the gems on the cars, you would earn them as a reward for spending gems on other stuff. So I think those two were fairly reasonable, But the problem that, me and many other people had were some of the higher tiers. The second to last car, the Ferrari F40, you would have to spend 19,400 gems in a single month, which is about $200, something like that, which was more than an average player spent in a year. But the F40 was not the final car in the Racer Club, because there was another one above it. The Ferrari Enzo, and the amount of gems you need to spend? 38,800, and people were enraged. I mean, that was over $400, and it was a sign that the game has finally gone fully pay to win, or was it? Well, I was really frustrated with, the high amount of cash you actually needed to spend to get some of those cars. I did eventually realize that this was not meant for everyone, and so, only the top spenders would get the Ferrari Enzo, and a couple of them did actually pop up on the market for the low price of like $200. Now, I did actually get a chance to try out both the F40 and the Enzo as well, and when I tried them out, and I mean, when I hopped into a lobby in a Ferrari Enzo, like, you would get the same amount of attention in a lobby as you would driving a Ferrari on a street. Like, it was insane, and that's when I kind of realized that, I mean, maybe this was not such a bad thing after all. I mean, the Enzo really wasn't that amazing, but it was still pretty cool, and even though I really hated the way the F40 drove, I still, realized that these cars, they were just used for flexing. I mean, they were special, and thankfully the developers did actually lower the amount of gems you need to spend for further racer clubs. But the Ferrari F40 and the Enzo weren't the only hyped up cars during the summer of 2016, because a car which thousands of people, including me, have been waiting for years was finally released. The Mitsubishi Evo 8 Race Edition, and this thing was insane. It was actually so popular that I believe it was like one of very few cars which actually went up in value after the initial release, because there was so much demand, and even though it sadly wasn't even close to being as competitive as the B-Class Evo, this was still an amazing trophy, and they were insanely popular. After I returned from the land of, if I'm being real, overpriced stuff, I went back to the R2 class Pinks and I discovered a true gem. The Bentley Continental GT3 was a car which I used to race just a tiny bit back on my old phone, but when I tried it out on the iPad, this thing was insane. Now, it was quick, and the launch was also quick, and the shifts as well, but this thing, if you got consistent with it, this thing was by far the most satisfying car that I drove in racing rivals, and it quickly became one of my go-to cars, and I became really good with it. But just as I discovered my love for the Bentley GT3, another car was released from the R2 class, and in my opinion that was the only R2 class car which gave the Bentley a run for its money, and that was the 2017 Ford GT, and this thing was one of the biggest surprises ever in my opinion in racing rivals, because this was a R2 class car, a really quick R2 class car at that, and it really drove so easily. You could get a perfect launch with a good reaction time 9 times out of 10. Like, this thing was insane, and the 2017 GT and the Bentley GT3 became my favorite R2 class cars. I came so far in this game, like literally from nothing to building up a community on my YouTube channel, waking up to like 20 Facebook messages each day, being a well-respected, trader in the community, and I was looking through my old videos, searching for clips for the past 2 videos, and I became so arrogant. Like, I was literally looking down and mocking people who were doing the same things I was when I started the game, and I had no idea that I was so unlikable, so arrogant, and oh my god, I'm so sorry. Like, literally, to everyone who interacted with me during that time. I mean, I would still say that racing rivals changed me in a lot of ways, and most of them were good, but oh boy, that one that one wasn't good at all. The game, however, was better than ever, but there were still some features which, really weren't as good as they used to be. I already mentioned that the tournaments were forgotten quite quickly, but another feature which, really went downhill was the Racer Showdown. Now, I already mentioned in the first part that, Racer Showdown used to reward these amazing golden, bronze and silver cars, and that was no longer the case. Sadly, it now only offered RRC and gem prizes, and considering, how cheap Racing Rivals Cash was getting, there really just wasn't any point in, playing Racer Showdown anymore. Still though, a lot of amazing things were going on, and it's weird to me, looking back on 2016 all these years later, because 2016 to me represented the best time of my life, because, my future was uncertain, but at the time it looked so amazing. I thought that I could literally, just make YouTube videos and play Racing Rivals and have that be my life, and that was the dream at the time, before I, became a pizza delivery driver for like 3.5 years. But there was one moment that I remember distinctively, and it's so bizarre. Now, on one cold September night of 2016, I was going to a house party with a friend of mine, and, it was dark, we were walking, on like a poorly lit village road, and we were just talking. And at that time, I have just began dating my first girlfriend, which was actually a direct result of me playing Racing Rivals, if you believe it or not. And then we were talking about the Racing Rivals Player Council, which was just coming up. Now this was going to be, like a meetup of some really important Racing Rivals players, and they would, discuss about the game and its future. And, I really thought that perhaps I was going to be, invited. I mean, there were even rumors of Racing Rivals potentially becoming an esport, and when I told my friend that, he turned around, looked at me, and he said, "Holy shit, dude, like things are really looking up for you." And I thought to myself, yeah, it's so amazing. And besides, there was an update coming to Racing Rivals, and this update was going to be the biggest one yet, and it was gonna be amazing, and so things could only get better from there. Hello folks, Jerry here, and welcome back to the third part of the story of Racing Rivals. It's been fun talking about the humble beginnings and eventually the meteoric rise of Racing Rivals, and you should totally check those videos out, but unfortunately, when there is a rise, there is also a fall. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the problems of Racing Rivals that I mostly glanced over in the previous episodes, and then we'll go ahead and check out the second worst update that the game ever got. Yeah, that's foreshadowing. Still though, I don't want to only talk about my favorite game of all time in a negative way, so throughout the video there's gonna be a couple of our favorite Racing Rivals YouTubers talking about their favorite memories from Racing Rivals. Also, keep in mind that while the glory days of the game were mostly over after the update we'll be talking about, the soul of the game was still there and it was fun to play, but I want to document every single aspect of Racing Rivals, the good and the bad. Enough delay, let's jump into it. So, we left off during the summer of 2016, and at that time Racing Rivals was my life. I spent hours making videos and deals and updating my sales posts every single day, but even at that point, at the game's absolute peak, there were unfortunately some not so good things about it, and by far the most notorious were the scammers. Trading in Racing Rivals was completely improvised because the developers didn't expect people to lose their cars or cash on purpose. That meant that in the deals you made, someone always had to give over their stuff first, and by going first you always risk the chance of getting scammed. I'm sure that every single one of you who played Racing Rivals back in the day got scammed at least once, and I was no exception. Throughout the many years I played this game, I do find it kinda shocking that I only got scammed once, and even more shockingly, it was literally during my first week of playing. So when I started recording Racing Rivals, I got really lucky because, well, pretty much instantly people found my videos, and only a couple of days after, I was streaming Racing Rivals pretty much every single day. On those streams we had a lot of fun. I made quite a few friends like Bravoman, F-Savix and Ghost, but as a noob I also got given quite a bunch of cars which I was really thankful for. And one of the people who donated was no other than Mikey Fiash. He was the person that introduced me to the Evo, which I ended up racing for years after that. He gave me my first ever fully upgraded Evo 8. Mikey Fiash would also be the only person to ever successfully scam me in the game. He pretended to be F-Savix on a different account, and because I was naive, he took both my Z4 GT3 and my 4 GTR and then dipped. If by any chance, Mikey Fiash, you're watching, good job dude, you got me. Perhaps me getting scammed so early on was actually a good thing, because I was a lot more careful from that point on, and I eventually ended up making a few videos on how to protect yourself from getting scammed, which hopefully helped someone out. But eventually I was able to create a whole car selling business because of scammers, because even though I was selling my cars for above market price, people knew that I was never ever gonna scam them, and I didn't. I might have become an arrogant douchebag, but hey, at least my conscience was clean. Scamming was definitely a huge problem, but another one was a collapsing in-game economy. Let's just do some quick math here. So every single week on the Turf Wars, the top 100 teams would get a turf car, and there would be up to 20 people in each team. Do the math, and that is 2000 turf cars being given out every single week. Not to mention, with the introduction of the turf crates in mid-2016, the cars that were in it lost pretty much all value. And don't get me wrong, the turf crates were good because it allowed a lot more people to get their hands on some pretty cool cars, but it wasn't ideal for the stability of the market. Eventually, the market just got oversaturated and rare cars started to lose value. In-game cash became gold for Indonesian farmers who, throughout glitching and selling Racing Rivals cash, drove value from $15 in late 2014 to less than 50 cents during the summer of 2016. Add in the cloning, which was used to duplicate 95% of rare cars in the game, and you had a disaster of an economy that would only get worse. You would also meet an occasional cheater, and even though I don't think I ever lost my car to one, there were still a lot of light laggers trying to distract you by purposely delaying the start of the race. So clearly there were some problems with Racing Rivals, but in reality you kinda just got used to it, and the rest of the issues were, well, avoidable if you were careful. So fast forward to October of 2016 and the game was arguably better than ever, and to light up the mood, here is a couple of our favorite Racing Rivals YouTubers talking about their favorite memories from the game.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about that game was just how simple it was. You just go in, load up, get into a car, and just go racing. That's just it. It was just so simple, such a simple game, especially back in 2014. Go ahead, get money, keep grinding, progress through either the campaign, you could trade cars, through pink slips. It's just such a good formula for the game, and that's something that can't be forgotten, especially nowadays with these racing games not even having this pink slip formula at all, just being mixed in. And that's just what separated Racing Rivals from any other racing game in existence.
Hey, iPolitely. My favorite memory from Racing Rivals would be making videos for anybody who watched them, and even if they didn't watch them, it was still a great time, you know, meeting people in lobbies, talking to them, you know, little smack talk here and there. It was all fun and games, and they changed my life. For one, financially, you know, I didn't have to work for a couple years. No, for two, the connections I made were amazing. I still keep up with a lot of people to this day. Most of my Instagram followers are people from the Racing Rivals community. So I just want to thank everybody for all the support and all the great memories we all made through these years.
I have to say, like, my favorite memories of Racing Rivals is just opening crates, just from the beginning of when I started playing, you know, just the suspense of not knowing what you're gonna unlock and what you're gonna get is just, it was what kept me in the game, I guess, this whole time, and got me into the community and got me making videos and all that stuff, and continued forward from there. So yeah, if I had to say, like, my favorite memories of Racing Rivals would be opening crates.
This next segment is gonna try to build up some suspense for the update that we'll be talking about, but to understand why the game changed so much so quickly, you guys might need some context. So 2016 was a pretty good year for Racing Rivals, but it wasn't doing nearly as good as in 2015. But why? To understand that, I actually had an amazing chance to interview Austin Ewan, the product manager of Racing Rivals, and he told me what was going on behind the scenes. Well, you can click in the top right corner to watch the full interview, but to summarize, in 2015, the management at Glue, who bought CA Games the year prior, promised bonuses to Racing Rivals developers if they surpassed the income projections for 2015. The developers sat down, talked, and decided to work their ass off for the entire year to surpass those projections, and they did. In 2015, Racing Rivals made $12 million more than the projections, projected. The team was excited to get the bonuses they were promised, but instead, all they got for working their ass off for the whole year was a cake. The original dev team clearly had a lot of passion, not just for Racing Rivals, but for cars in general, but as the original members of the team started leaving one by one, they were eventually replaced by people who just didn't have that same passion. Fast forwarding to the summer of 2016, a little game called CSR 2 was released, and it blew everyone, including the Racing Rivals team, away with its graphics. So we had a perfect storm of people who didn't know what made Racing Rivals, and CSR2 releasing to pretty much only positive reviews, and as a result, in the late October of 2016, Racing Rivals got a massive update, the 6.0 update. Most people point out a different update as the update that killed Racing Rivals, but for me, the 31st of October of 2016 marked the end of the golden era of the game. I mean, Racing Rivals was never a great looking game, but it definitely was not a bad looking one either, and no one really played Racing Rivals for the graphics. No, we played and loved Racing Rivals because of the cars and the community that this game helped build. But on that day, the familiar style of Racing Rivals was gone, being instead replaced by an overly blue user interface and a font which I can only describe as a mistake. To add insult to injury, when 6.0 released, the game was less than optimized. It was lagging heavily, and it would lag less if you turned off the so-called experimental graphics, but if you did, at least in my opinion, the game looked worse than it did before. Another thing that was added was the global chat, which instantly became the go-to place for scammers, so that feature was dead on arrival, but hey, looking on the bright side, at least we got to keep all of our cars, and well, 6.0 overall was a pretty bad update. They did add some good features like the daily goals. Also, the same week that 6.0 released, we finally got one of the most anticipated turf cars of all time, the Honda Civic Si-RE. The hype was insane and it quickly became one of the most expensive cars in the game, and it was actually a pretty good car. To go along with the Civic Si-RE, we actually got a whole Honda themed update. It was pretty similar to the BMW event we had the year prior, and some of the biggest highlights were a new king of D-Class, the Civic Type R Motorsports, and the Civic Type R RE, a car which was so rare I was convinced it didn't even exist for a few months until I found one for sale. Everyone also got a free Civic Type R, which was pretty cool. The Honda event itself was intriguing enough, there were a couple of fantastic cars added, but it wasn't quite as exciting as the BMW event. Still though, pretty fun. In December of 2016, we actually got a few cool features with the release of the 6.1 update, namely the personal mechanic, which would automatically select the best parts to upgrade on your car, and it really sped up the process of maxing out your ride. It was pretty cool, but the other feature was even better, the test drive. In your garage, you now had an option to race your car without damaging it, and for me, who often raced a lot of different cars pretty much every day, it was actually a fantastic way to practice your launches and shifts without, well, taking a boost and damaging your car. So, there were still some cool features being added to the game, but before we continue, here's a few more cameos.
Honestly, bro, the best part and most memorable stuff about Racing Rivals to me is the whole community could be so toxic to one another on the track, but if somebody in their personal life was in need, everybody banded together to help them out. And as far as I'm concerned, that is what made me love the game and love the community and try to do everything that I could do to help the community out. It's just amazing how strangers can come together over a mobile video game and be so close and feel almost like family together. Sometimes even closer than your blood family. But yeah, my most memorable moment would be when everybody banded together to turf for those that had tragedies in their life and just needed help from everybody.
I mean, you know, my favorite moment from Racing Rivals had to be mid-2017. When the times were great, and before, 7.0 had ever hit the shelves. It was great because everyone enjoyed the game, maybe not 100%, but it was universally enjoyed by everyone, And I've gotta say, it really did help me turn into the person I am today. Cause being a YouTuber, I motivated and entertained people by the thousands, and that I could never forget,
I don't know if he needs another. I would, but that RT though. Nice. That's like the first time I've ever won.
With the personal mechanic and the test drive features, we also got some amazing new turf cars. Shoutouts to the Mazda RX-7 RE and the Ford GT-R RE, but once the Honda crates were gone, we also got the Ferrari crates, and with the Ferrari crates we got the new quickest S-Class car, the Ferrari 550 Maranello, but we also got one of the worst cars in the game, the 575 GTC. We'll get to that one. The one car that was released during that time that I really want to highlight is no other than the car you saw in the thumbnail, the Ford Focus RS RE. This was actually a turf car released in March of 2017, but the developers messed up and didn't make the unwrapped Focuses paintable. People were pissed, and it resulted in everyone, and I mean everyone, getting a Ford Focus RS RE for free. The developers did previously give a few cars away, like the Cobra Jet, the Z4 GT3 and the Ford GTR, but the Ford Focus was a very fast R2 class car, and because everyone got one, it replaced the M3 GT2 as the quickest cheap car in the game, and it quickly became hated because a lot of people wanted to pink slip expensive cars in their Focuses. It was actually a pretty cool car though. One thing that I did forget to mention in the previous parts is that every single year the developers would have something prepared for us for April Fools. In 2016 we got the Top Fool Dragster, which was a great troll because you would either get a perfect launch or a traction loss, and nothing else. In 2015, 1 year before, we would get the Suteresa and the Bosuzoku, which were these over-the-top Japanese cars. There was even a Valentine's Day version of one of them, but in 2017 we got the Diamond Mystery Crate, which would only give out Volkswagen Golf Harlequins, which I'm not even mad, like that's actually really cool. Right after April Fools, we got a bit of a bigger update, so just like in Car Town the years prior, we actually got a lot of Fast and Furious themed cars to promote their new movie, The Fate of the Furious. Now, I rather wouldn't comment on the movie itself, because it sucked, but these cars were actually really cool, specifically the Ice Charger. We got a staggering amount of DOMS chargers in Racing Rivals. We got the off-road charger, the steel charger, the matte charger, the gloss charger, you get the point, but the only one that I really loved was the ice charger. This thing was fantastic to race, super consistent and very fast, being one of only a handful of R2s that could actually hit 6.6s. I didn't end up racing it a whole lot because they were super expensive, but it definitely deserves an honorable mention. Now, some of you might remember that I mentioned that I started dating my first girlfriend in September of 2016 as a direct result of me playing Racing Rivals, and as bizarre as that sounds, it's actually true. It was pretty weird, but on 28th of April of 2017, young Jerry had his first breakup, and for the first time in years, Racing Rivals wasn't the main thing on my mind anymore. Now, it was pretty rough. I did stop uploading for a few weeks, but at that point I did a lot of pink slipping off camera, and I actually came up with an idea for a video series. Basically, in 2017 there were hundreds of cars in different classes, and some classes were quite full, you know, having over 50 cars in some of them. And as I pink slipped cars like the Bentley GT3 and the 2017 Ford GT and the Ice Charger, I started wondering which of these cars are actually the best in the R2 class. I named the series R2 Breakdown, and in every episode I would get a different R2 class car, pink slip it and give my opinion on it. I made over 50 episodes of the R2 Breakdown, and in it I got the chance to pink slip almost all of the R2 class cars that Racing Rivals had to offer. I realized that some cars like the Ford GTR and the M6 GT3 were actually really good, the Z4 GT3 was always trash, but somehow the worst car ended up being the 575 GTC, which had zero redeeming qualities. The biggest surprise overall in the R2 Breakdown for me was the Google Play Acura NSX GT3. Now, there were a lot of different versions of the NSX GT3 in the game, and they all drove in a way that I didn't like, but the Google Play one was something special. It was by far the easiest to drive and the quickest, and it really got me thinking, what were some of the other cars that I never drove in Racing Rivals? Like I said, I picked almost all of the R2 class cars in the game, but unfortunately I never made the final ranking for the series. So you guys let me know if you want to see the full ranking of the R2 Breakdown cars 5 years later, because I will make it if you guys want it. In June of 2017 we got the 6.3 update, which finally replaced the god-awful font, and you could now instantly upgrade all stage 1 and stage 2 parts at once, which definitely came in handy. The 6.4 update in August finally killed off the global chat, but it also introduced the smart tachometer, which showed you the best way to shift your car, which was quite handy for R2 Breakdown because, well, I picked different cars pretty much every day. That update unfortunately also added private friend lobbies where you could race your friends and trade in peace. I say unfortunately because you couldn't actually lobby jump anymore. You see, the max rating of the cars I raced at that time was just around the lobby limit, and it was a lot more difficult to find pink slips because the quickest lobby with a speed rating of 1690 was at that point filled only with Koenigseggs and Ford Focus RS's, of course, and most of the cars I raced barely got into that lobby and would be destroyed by pretty much any opponent. After I ran out of cars for the R2 class breakdown, I have decided to focus on the class below it, the R class. I made a couple of episodes of it, but unfortunately the lobby jumping restrictions completely killed that class, and I had a very hard time finding pink slips, and for a while I stopped uploading videos. We'll get to the reason why, but before we do, here's a couple of our final Racing Rivals YouTuber clips.
What up, it's Justin Hemmati. Hopefully y'all remember me way back from the squeaker days, back in like 2017, 2016, the good old days. So I would say that my favorite moment in Racing Rivals just has to be my first pink slip ever, because it just fully formed me into the pink slip addict that I once was, and it kind of just started off my whole YouTube thing. Pretty much how this pink slip went was I was in a Scion TC, fresh out of finishing campaign, like not that many upgrades, and I challenged a Honda S2000 and he raises to pinks, and I was like, oh shit. Heart was absolutely pumping. That's what I remember. I did it. I clicked let's race, just absolutely scared. I missed the launch completely and just fucked up the run, but the Honda actually spun, and just the rush of winning that pink slip was something that it's like a drug, you know? Like, I just can't get that high from anything other than just winning a car in pinks. Definitely thank you, Jerry, for having me in the video. Peace.
Hey Jerry, so DJMaslak here. I would say my favorite thing about Racing Rivals was definitely the idea to be able to race for pink slips. Especially classes that were way higher than the car you were in. I was pretty known for always, pinking with Stellas versus the higher classes like the BMW, GT3 or the GT2. I was always trying to win the cars that were maybe more rare, or the turf cars with slower cars, just to see if I could edge them out with performance. I definitely enjoy that the most about Racing Rivals, and definitely the turf wars too. The idea to battle other teams and have the privilege of turfing, on one of the best teams during the era was definitely a great experience. And I do miss that part about Racing Rivals, and hopefully they bring that game back.
At this point, I would like to take a moment to thank all of the people who submitted clips for this video. So, obviously, I did kind of put myself as the center of attention for the series, but Racing Rivals was as great as it was because of the community that these people helped build. So I'm sure that these people didn't only help me, but also you guys throughout some pretty interesting times, and that is honestly priceless. But let's get back to the reason why I stopped playing Racing Rivals back in 2017. So in August I passed my driver's license, and at that time I was hunting for my first car. At that point, I didn't work a day in my life, so this car would be bought exclusively with money I made from Racing Rivals. And my budget wasn't super high, but I was looking at cars like the Toyota Celica and the Mitsubishi Eclipse, but then I eventually settled on this. My 2005 Hyundai Tiburon was love at first sight. I grew up playing racing games, and finally having a car of my own, let alone this thing, which to me at least was really cool, was a fantastic feeling. It was fun to drive because it was a manual, it was cheap and reliable. If you guys are looking for a first car, I would really recommend you look at these. To me, it was a slow transition from video games into adulthood, but every time I looked at my car, I thought about Racing Rivals, and I did sell my Tibi 6 months ago and got myself a DS3, which is better in pretty much every way, but that Hyundai, dude, it's still my favorite car in the entire world. But let's get back to Racing Rivals, because even though I wasn't playing at the time, there were some cool things happening. For example, there was a pretty cool Christmas event at the end of 2017 where you would collect coal and toy cars, where you could later exchange them for a Civic Si RE and the Mitsubishi Evo 8 RE, which were up to that point the two of the most expensive cars in the game, which kinda drives home the point that the economy was screwed. There were even more cars you could win for free, like Cobra Jets and some Subarus, but there was also a 24-hour event where the top 3000 teams would get a car that the community wanted for years, the Nissan Skyline R34 RE. It did turn out to be one of the quickest R2 class cars, but almost everyone got one, so it wasn't that special. Also, most of them weren't pinkable. But after Christmas, the game really didn't get any interesting updates for over a month, and I didn't even play Racing Rivals at that time, but I know that a lot of people were quitting. I would have to say a lot of us just started to slowly outgrow the game, and while the game was still fun, it just didn't have the soul and the community that it had before the 6.0 update. As much as I hate to admit it, I was pretty sure that Racing Rivals was on borrowed time, but as it turns out, there was something going on behind the scenes, because the team was working on an update that would completely change Racing Rivals. It would be announced on the 14th of February of 2018, and oh boy, did it suck. You know, since the start of the series, I really had no idea how to approach this final episode. Should it be happy, sad, maybe angry? To be honest, as of filming this, I still really have no clue. So, let's recap real quick. We've talked about what Racing Rivals was like at the beginning and how it eventually rose to be one of the most popular mobile racing games of all time. We've also talked about how the game unfortunately fell from grace due to some pretty poor decisions and the 6.0 update not being all that great. But almost everyone agrees what the worst update Racing Rivals ever got is. And so, in this final episode of the story of Racing Rivals, we'll be taking a look at the 7.0 update and seeing if it was really that bad. In any way, hopefully you guys enjoy. "7.0. Those words are infamous to anyone who is at least somewhat familiar with Racing Rivals, but why? Was there ever a chance of this update working out? Well, to understand why 7.0 happened, we need context, which is why we went into depth about what went wrong with the game in part 3, which I would really recommend checking out, just so you guys know why the game was in shambles. Well, to summarize, in early 2018 there weren't really any exciting new updates. Players were leaving Racing Rivals in droves, including me, and the economy, to put it mildly, was fucked. A great sign of that was that in the Christmas event of 2017, players could win Evo 8 Race Editions, Cobra Jets and Civic Si R East for free, and those were some of the only few cars that were still considered valuable. I think that was a pretty clear sign that the developers abandoned the idea of Racing Rivals as we knew it, but any questions were gone on the 14th of February of 2018 with the massive announcement of the 7.0 update. Along with the announcement, the developers also provided an FAQ, some frequently asked questions, so let's go over them to see what was new about the 7.0 update. What's happening to my existing cars? Well, that's kind of a weird question. Shouldn't they just stay exactly where they are? No, they'll be moved into the legacy garage where you won't be able to pink slip them, tune them, customize them or change them in pretty much any way. Huh. Okay, well that is a very bold decision, but what about boosts? Okay, looks like the boosts will be removed as well. That kinda makes sense, it wasn't a feature that was really loved by anyone. Gems will also transfer over, which is at least something, but what about Racing Rivals cash, you know, the main currency? Okay, RLC does transfer over if you buy it from the game. So that's irrelevant, since a million RLC costs $100 to the game and 25 cents on the black market. What happens otherwise? Oh, it's gone, like it never existed. Just for good measure, all inventory items and blueprints will also be removed as well, but long-time players will get some legacy rewards. Okay, cool, I'm sure that they will be worth the years of cards and progress that will be erased. So, as you would imagine, the community was beyond pissed off, at least the people that didn't instantly quit the game, but for the record, I do understand why the developers would do something as drastic as this, because there was just no coming back from the destroyed economy that Racing Rivals had. There was just no way that Racing Rivals could continue existing with the rapidly decreasing player base, and even the players who remained, they didn't buy anything apart from maybe gems from the game itself because, well, everything on the black market was so cheap and the game just wasn't making enough money. And that was the mindset that I had when I initially read those patch notes. I obviously wasn't very happy about everyone losing their stuff, but I was at least somewhat pleased that the developers decided to not just pull the plug on Racing Rivals. I was kind of excited about the 7.0 update. At the time, I got a lot of shit for saying that out loud, but a few weeks ago I did make a poll asking you guys whether I should make a fair, non-biased, well, mostly non-biased review about the 7.0 update, and you guys said yes. So today, almost 4 years after the update came out, we'll be taking a look at the 7.0 update and seeing if it was ever any good to begin with. For all intents and purposes, I don't think that 7.0 was a continuation of the Racing Rivals timeline. I mean, they even changed the name. No longer was the game called Racing Rivals, it was now called Racing Rivals World Tour. And it did feel like a different game, and that's what turned off the majority of the players, in case locking up all of their cars and erasing their cache wasn't enough. The 7.0 update was released on June 12th of 2018, and you guys might be thinking, wait, if the update was announced in February, what could the players do for those 4 months in between? Well, there was a lot of talk about the legacy events that would be going on in 7.0. So a lot of players spent those few months tuning cars from different brands and eras, hoping that their grind would eventually be worth the effort. Searching for footage for this video, I found a lot of people that were collecting and tuning their cars non-stop for the updates, since when 7.0 dropped, you wouldn't be able to tune them anymore. I'm sad to say that legacy events turned out to be completely underwhelming. Now obviously the majority of players would not be okay with their progress being pretty much reset, but perhaps if the release of the update went down without any problems, the game still maybe had a chance. I'll let you guys take a guess at how the 7.0 release went. A. 7.0 released without any problems whatsoever. B. 7.0 kinda released, but only like 10 people were allowed to get onto the game and the rest of the players only got an error screen and 7.0 instantly became a meme. Or C. I don't even have anything prepared, you guys know this bill already. So the 7.0 release was a disaster, but a few days later, finally us players were able to finally get onto the game and see what the new Racing Rivals was like. The returning players did get a bunch of legacy rewards like exclusive paint, rims, and even a few cars, plus the one thing that did carry over was the level and your progress in the campaign, so you did end up getting a few cars. The devs did talk a lot about how the legacy rewards would be great, and we did get cars like the Viper ACR, the Nismo GT3 and the M3 GT2 for free, but the problem with that is that really only the people who played Racing Rivals before 7.0 played the new version, and so almost everyone had those cars instantly, putting the economy in jeopardy, yeah, almost instantly. But okay, that's enough shit talking. For a few minutes, we'll try to be unbiased and see if 7.0 could ever work on its own. First off, the garage. I have to say it looked much better than before because it wasn't as dark anymore. The UI was also completely different, but overall, not a bad change, and props to them for keeping the test drive feature. Another big change was the vault map, which to be honest looked a whole lot better than before and would be pretty cool once it would be filled with different events, but I do think they could have done more with it because a massive chunk of the globe was completely empty. The upgrade menus in garages stayed pretty much the same though, although car customization was almost non-existent. You couldn't even buy rims or paint from the garage anymore, you had to open crates. Let's move on to cars in 7.0. Well, obviously there were a lot less different cars in 7.0 because the previous version had almost 5 years worth of car releases, but 7.0 did actually have some new cars like the Mitsubishi 3000 GT and the Porsche 959, which were really cool. All cars drove differently than on the older versions, and the lobby ratings and car classes themselves were changed. The Pagani Zonda R, for example, now maxed out at 1674 and was considerably slower than before when it maxed out at 1683, just like most cars, and the R3 class was cut altogether. R2 class still existed, but they were insanely rare. Also, the cars now had different rarity tiers, but I'm not really sure if they had any impact other than, well, flexing. The racing itself was similar to before, but like I said, all the cars drove differently, and after years of getting used to the way certain cars drove, most people just weren't very excited about having to learn all of that again. The one thing that I was really excited about though was progressing from the bottom to the top once again, going from the slowest car classes to the highest. The progress in 7.0 would obviously be much slower, but like they say, it's about the journey, not the destination. There would be some pink slipping going on, but only with the slowest cars. Unfortunately, the thing that I quite quickly realized is that the economy took a massive 180 with 7.0. Everything was worthless in the game before, and everything was simply too expensive now to make the basic elements of the game fun, like pink slipping. And it wasn't necessarily only about losing your car, but also all of the money that you put into it to max it out. Everyone was broke, and if you just lost the car you spent a few days maxing out, you could be quitting the game entirely because the grind wasn't all that fun, and that was because the community was much smaller than before. Most people quit before 7.0, some quickly after, and there were almost no new players coming to the game, and the black market was mostly dead. Another major change was the introduction of the event tickets. Now, previously you could race as much as you wanted to, but if your car was upgraded, you would get engine damage and your car would be slower. In 7.0 though, once you ran out of tickets, you couldn't even enter events anymore. You either had to wait for the tickets to refill or buy them, and in my opinion that was one of the worst changes because you couldn't play as much as you wanted to, which was one of the best things about Racing Rivals previously. There was one completely new aspect of Racing Rivals though, which had a lot of effort put into it. The collections. You would get all your paints, rims and cars from here, and yes, the car dealership didn't exist in 7.0 anymore. In collections you had a lot of different objectives where you would get some pretty amazing prizes, and this is in fact one of the few changes that I did really like. So, clearly there were some massive changes with the 7.0 update, but over the course of the next few months after the release of the update there were plenty more changes, so let's go over them and see if those were any good. Roughly a week after the 7.0 launch we got the Tuner Challenge, which was kind of a new take on the Racer Showdown. Basically you would tune your car to a certain rating and then race against opponents, and by winning you would progress to the higher and higher ranks and getting some pretty cool prizes in the process. Now overall I really liked the Tuner Challenge, but there was one major drawback compared to Racer Showdown. When you raced in the Tuner Challenge you found an opponent instantly in a menu. You had no choice to select a different opponent, which I guess did stop cheating, but you never actually jumped in a lobby and talked to any other players. And that communication is what actually made Racing Rivals that great. You know, you could just hop into a random lobby and shit talk with a random person, or maybe become best friends with them. Now, aside from that, I actually did like the Tuner Challenge, but it just felt a little bit empty. Another feature that was eventually released that I really liked was the car decks. In it you could see every single car released in 7.0 and how many players actually owned those specific cars. Now, as a dude who loves statistics, this was a fantastic feature because you could finally get a sense of how rare certain cars actually were. You could also buy certain cars from the car decks, so it kinda acted like a car dealership. Along with the release of the car decks, we also got the much awaited return of the revamped Turf Wars. These were quite similar to the Tuner Challenge, as the game would once again automatically select opponents for you, taking a large chunk of the banter which made the game fun away from turfing. Instead of the usual turf car rewards, turfing would award you trophies which you could then redeem for one of multiple different versions of the turf cars. Now, that wasn't necessarily a bad change, but it did take something away from turfing, as you never really had a scenario anymore where you and your team had to get on the game just before the event ended and seriously push for a top 25 place to get a more special version of that week's turf car. It did feel a lot more satisfying to earn a car than some trophies with which you could then redeem a car, but that's just my opinion, which just happens to be the general consensus, but oh well. In the late August of 2018, the game celebrated its 5th birthday and everyone got a free Nissan Skyline R34 with a pretty awesome wrap, as well as some cool customization items. Now, spoilers, there weren't exactly many seasonal events in 7.0 for reasons that will become apparent very soon, but there was a very cool one for Halloween of 2018. All players could claim a free Plymouth satellite and then complete objectives and earn rewards that you could then redeem to upgrade the satellite to the final demonic version. This event did in fact show that the developers did still care about the game just a little bit, because all the different versions of the satellite that you could get, they were customized and they were actually pretty cool. But do you guys remember the card decks that I mentioned earlier? Well, like I said, the card decks did allow players to see how much percentage of all the players own specific cards, and the Plymouth satellite was given to absolutely everyone for free. Everyone. And, well, as it turns out, despite of that, with all the versions of the car combined, only 15% of all the players owned the satellite, with less than 1% of all the players actually completing the event. Yeah, it was only a matter of time now. Sure enough, not even a month later, on the 22nd of November of 2018, the inevitable post was made on the Racing Rivals Facebook page. Racing Rivals would be shutting down on March 31st of 2019. But before we talk about that, let's talk about 7.0. Now, I did a lot of research for this video, because if I was gonna give 7.0 an honest review, I was gonna do it right. And, well, here's the main question. Was 7.0 really that bad? No, not really. The game was okay, but it never stood a chance. Now, obviously 7.0 wasn't nearly as good as 5.3 or something, but still, everyone got really pissed as soon as they found out all their progress was going to be wiped, and no matter what the developers did, most of those people would never come back, and the game never got a lot of new players after 7.0. The community was completely destroyed, and I could barely find any videos on 7.0 for this video. I can't believe I'm gonna say this after years of bashing 7.0, but I think that the developers, for the most part, did a decent job. There were a lot of good changes that were completely overshadowed by the legacy garage, justifiably so. For example, the new garage and the map looked pretty awesome. I actually really loved the collection system, the card decks was fantastic, and the Halloween event was really cool. 7.0 was honestly better than I remembered, but ultimately, all the good changes didn't matter, because this game, the 7.0 update, it was always gonna fail. Now, obviously, 7.0 still had a lot of misses, and I'm not only talking about the Legacy Garage, but I think that if 7.0 never released and, well, was released now, a couple of years after Racing Rivals shut down as like Racing Rivals 2, honestly, I think it could have worked. Now, for it to work, obviously, they would have to make quite a bit of changes. For example, get rid of that god-awful ticket system, bring back proper multiplayer lobbies, and make paint and rims purchasable from the game, amongst many other things, but obviously, that's never gonna happen. When the shutdown announcement was made, no one was surprised. It was less than 6 months after the release of the 7.0 update, but no one really played the game anymore. The developers were nice enough to give everyone some cool perks, since there were still a couple of months until the servers would close, like cheap crates and quicker upgrades. The perks were nice, but ultimately they didn't really matter, because barely anyone played Rivals before the announcement, and after it, there was really no point. That would end up being the last update that Racing Rivals ever got. As months went by and the 31st of March was quickly approaching, me and so many others, we just didn't know how to feel about the game shutting down. I mean, we all knew it was coming for a long time, but this current version of the game was so much different than the game we fell in love with. Nonetheless, in the days before the shutdown, a lot of different posts and YouTube videos were made, saying goodbye to Rivals for one final time. I did one as well, but I also decided to host a live stream of the last few hours of the game. Starting up the live stream, it was immediately an emotional roller coaster. Now, views for Racing Rivals were significantly down since the game hit its peak, but a lot of people decided to stop by for one last time. And there were a lot of familiar names in the chat, and one of them was no other than Pigpen, the one and only, and he eventually joined in on a Skype call and shared some of his amazing stories and talked about the player council. Not too long after, the Skype call was absolutely packed with people like iPolitely, Edward Lopez 2YT and NSGS, and we didn't even race on the game anymore, we just talked about our favorite memories from the game, and honestly, I think that perfectly sums up Racing Rivals. The game back in the day was absolutely fantastic, but what ultimately made Racing Rivals was the community, and once people started leaving, the game stopped being as great as it once was. Now 7.0 had some pretty big issues, but if the community was as great and big as it once was, who knows? As the 31st of March of 2019 drew to a close, we counted down the final few seconds of Racing Rivals, but to our surprise, nothing happened. I mean, some people were sure that it was all an April Fool's prank, but it wasn't. Racing Rivals shut down a few hours later on April 1st of 2019. But that stream, it was truly something special. We had fun, we talked, we shared memories of Racing Rivals, and none of us were all really that sad. I mean, we knew that Racing Rivals had completed its life cycle, and what we were playing at that moment was only a shell of a once fantastic game, but it was still an end of an era. I mean, none of us were sad about the game shutting down, we were sad because we knew it was the last time that most of us would race each other. And then, that was it. Racing Rivals was dead. But what killed it? When I started this project almost 2 years ago, I honestly had no idea, but after talking with a lot of you guys and interviewing Austin Ewan, the former product manager of Rivals, we finally have an answer. The thing that ultimately killed Racing Rivals is mismanagement. The original developer team made Racing Rivals to be a high stakes, a simple yet a complex mobile racing game, but when the community found it, they made it into so much more. The pink slip in the black market, the turf wars and everything else made Racing Rivals my personal favorite game of all time. Will we ever get a sequel to Racing Rivals? Well, at the time of recording, the original company behind Racing Rivals is currently working on a new drag racing game called Auto Legends. Honestly, I'm very excited about it, but we are yet to see if the game is gonna bring people together in the same way that Rivals did. Ultimately, the story of Racing Rivals is a mixed one. The game started off slow, but absolutely blew up and, well, unfortunately went into a slow but sure downward spiral as glue took over. But overall, this game completely changed my life and I am very happy that I stuck around to the end. Now, there are a few more things that I'd like to say, but if you guys don't want to hear an emotional monologue, feel free to click off now. Also, I found a very old list of some of the people who donated to me on Rivals back in the day, so here are some long overdue shoutouts. You know, not a day goes by when I don't think about Racing Rivals, and in a way, I made this series, the story of Racing Rivals, for me, as closure, because this game does not deserve to be forgotten ever, and for years now I've been trying to find a game that would make me feel the same way that Racing Rivals made me feel back in the day, but honestly, I probably never will. I played Rivals during some of my most impressionable years of my life. When I started playing, I was a quiet kid, super antisocial, but interacting with other players in the game and outside of it completely changed me. And then, of course, there were some really bizarre events that happened to me because of Rivals, and I ended up losing a lot of weight. I started selling cars on the game and earning more money than I make at my job now, and I became a lot more social. I can't even imagine what my life would be like if I never played Rivals. All because of a mobile racing game. Racing Rivals completely changed my life, and I never knew what my purpose in life was, but during that period in 2015 and 2016, I knew I wanted to be a YouTuber. I wanted to make videos. I wanted to be the center of a community, and at the time it looked promising. And honestly, that's one of the things that I miss the most, you know, the sense of having a purpose in life, to have dreams that are achievable. And I know just how cheesy this monologue is, but this is the way I feel, and I always felt like I let you guys and myself down when I stopped uploading content in 2017, when I stopped playing Rivals, because I had dreams that were achievable, but ultimately, you know, I didn't work on it, and this channel fell into obscurity. You know, for a while I wanted this series to be the final thing that I would ever upload onto YouTube and have this be my legacy, but, you know, making these videos, editing them, and then seeing the very positive reception from you guys, it made me find my sense of purpose again. So no, I'm not stopping. I love making videos, and yeah. So for the final few clips, the microphone decided to act up, so I'm just gonna hold this with my hands. Very professional up in here, but what I wanted to say is that hopefully the story of Racing Rivals made you relive some of your favorite memories from this fantastic game. And like I said in the Cartoon video, the game is gone forever, but ultimately what matters is that, you know, the memories from the game and the people we met from the game stay with us. Thank you guys so much for watching the story of Racing Rivals until the very end. This is by far the most effort and time I ever put into a video series, but it's also the one that I'm the most proud of, and this is exactly the type of content that I want to make in the future. So I would really appreciate it if you guys subscribed if you want to see more of this. I'm not sure what my next video is gonna be about, but hey, you guys can leave your suggestions in the comment section down below. Make sure to like the video if you liked, and yeah, that's about it. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care.